is going to be about how time is taught across Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So we teach using our scheme, which is White Rose Maths, and for time it's taught from Year 1 through to Year 4 in the summer terms. So in Year 1, children begin with simple time vocabulary such as today, tomorrow, later, before learning how to use an analogue clock, and then eventually that leads to exploring more complex time problems. In Year 1 and 2, they learn a bit more where they look at the errors, half errors, quarter past and 2, and 2 and past the hour. When we get to lower Key Stage 2, there's a bit more in depth where we look at 5-minute intervals on a clock, the 24-hour clock, and things like duration. As with all other areas that we have in our White Rose Math scheme, this is done through concrete, pictorial, and abstract methods. So like I said, in Year 1, they begin with simple time-based vocabulary such as before and after. We also look at things like days of the week, months of the year, before we move on to look at hours, minutes and seconds. After that, they then begin to tell the time to the hour using an analogue clock, and then after that we look at telling the time to the half hour. So if you have a look at the screen, you can see that there might be some kind of key questions that they might have in their work. So things like, what day is it today? Which day comes after or before so-and-so? What day was it yesterday? Just things to get their brains ticking and to think about the concept of time and how we can use that in our everyday vocabulary. We'll look at things, simple pictures and real life examples of clocks, such as which hour is the hand pointing to, and then they might move on to draw hands on the clocks themselves to show certain times. We'll begin to look at simple problems involving time, such as if Ron, for example, here has drawn some hands on a clock, the children will be looking at identifying what kind of mistake he's made. So you can see that he has used the longer hand of the clock to point to the 3, whereas he should have pointed it to the 12, and so on. So that's the kind of thing that children will do. They'll have a look and then they'll be able to fix it and explain why Ron was incorrect. We'll also do things like completing sentences that match clocks. So the hour hand is pointing halfway between something and something, and the time is half past whatever, for example, and then you might match the clocks to the times, or draw hands again on the clocks to show the times. This time we're looking at half past because they have already at this point secured their knowledge of the hour and the o'clock. In Year 2, they reconsolidate their learning to begin with of o'clock and half past before they move on to look at quarter past and quarter to. They then look at telling the time past the hour. So for example, it might be 10 past 2, it might be 20 past 2, or something very similar to that. Then they tell the time to the hour, so it could be 10 to 2, quarter to 2, and so on. They then look closely at clocks, so this will be done using an analogue clock to tell the time to 5 minutes. And then they look at how many minutes there are in an hour and how many hours there are in a day. Again, like we saw in Year 1, there will be some questions that they can use to help them with their problem solving skills and help them to develop their understanding of time in real life. So key questions are things like how many quarters are there in a one whole, how would you show a quarter on a clock, what does each hand on a clock represent, and so on, as you can see on the screen there. Year 2 then move on to have a look at the actual passing of time and how many hours there are in a day and so on. So they might have a look at some of the questions like we can see on the screen now. So if the hour hand moves all the way around the clock, how many hours have passed? Or things like what time does a new day start? What is the same and what is different about noon and midnight? Just things to get their brains ticking about time in the real world. And they will also have a little bit of a look at a few problem solving questions when it comes to time as well, such as how many hours is Sam in bed for, or how many hours is Sam not in bed for, and then again explaining why something is true or not not true, as the case may be with Tiny the turtle at the bottom there. Year 3 takes it up a notch. They start with looking at Roman numerals to 12 because there are a lot of clocks out there still that still use Roman numerals, so it's a really good thing for them to be able to visualise, to understand. They then look at telling the time to 5 minutes, so here they start to look a little bit closer at telling the time more accurately. Then they move on to tell the time to the minute, and they also get to have a look at telling time on a digital clock, which is what we are most used to now in this day and age, really, isn't it? They look at using AM and PM, they look at years, months and days, days and hours and minutes using start and end times. Examples for year 3, how they begin to look at telling the time on a digital clock. So they'll see lots of real life examples, lots of images to help them understand and to visualise what it will look like. They'll also do things like using number lines to help them complete sentences. So 44 minutes past 3 is the same as how many minutes to 4, for example. And you can see that they might do things like completing tables for how long an activity is taken, or working out the arrival time of a train between 2 different destinations, as an example. For teaching telling the time in year 4, they start by looking at years, months, weeks and days before moving on to hours, minutes and seconds. And for some of the final things that they learn, they convert between analogue and digital time, and they convert to and from the 24-hour clock. So as you can see on the left side of the screen here, they might do things like completing the tables, such as how many days there are in 20 weeks, for example, how many months there are in 2 years, and so on. So key questions: what activity lasts approximately 1 second, minute or an hour, getting them to think about things that they know in real life and putting that into the perspective of time. And they might look at how many seconds there are in a minute, for example, how many minutes there are in an hour, and just basically building on all of the knowledge that they've gathered from year 1 through to year 4. Work on matching and understanding the difference between analogue and digital time. So again, they'll use the pictorial methods of looking at pictures of the analogue clock and images of the digital clock and comparing and matching those. And they might do some work on writing 24-hour clocks as well to complete sentences, for example, as you can see at the bottom there. And yeah, just converting 24-hour clock times to 12-hour clock times and so on. That's given you a little bit of understanding on how we teach time here at Pixies from year 1 up until year 4. As you can see through all of the slides and the examples that you've seen today, that we use the concrete, pictorial, abstract methods, where first of all we look at what time is, then we look at images, and then finally we move on to using time in the real world and doing some problem solving.